I still remember when I started spending more time online looking at gaming content and checking out various websites, getting all these listicles that are now so popular, and just having these debates about the best games of all time, how something compares to something else, and the early days of what's so common right now. And one of the biggest debates I remember ever seeing was Mega Man 2 versus Mega Man 3. And I ultimately came down on neither of those. My favorite Mega Man classic game is one of the later ones, but I won't reveal what that is quite yet if you don't already know. But for the longest time, I was always of the opinion that Mega Man 2 was better than Mega Man 3. It just seemed like it had a better pace to it, even though there's a little bit more content in Mega Man 3, but that content comes in the form of the Doc robots. And that's where it became tricky. You had two equally good games. Which is the better one? And that has ultimately become the crux of the discussion when it comes to Mega Man 3. What does it change? How does it compare? Is it actually better than 2? And for a lot of people, no, it's not. But for a lot of others, yes, it is. Where do I come out on this debate? I honestly think from a pure gameplay standpoint, they are completely equal. There are some fantastic steps forward that Mega Man 3 takes, but there's also some stumbles that make Mega Man 2 more appealing. And it's also competing with the fact that Mega Man 2 is such a massive shift in the quality from 1 to 2. The shift in quality from 2 to 3 isn't quite as significant, which makes it seem not as important. But the big realization I had while playing this time around is that Mega Man 3 is kind of the opposite of Mega Man 2. With Mega Man 2, I felt that the core Robot Masters, all the stages for that, were brilliantly designed, a lot of fun, and was just a good time to go through, challenging without being too difficult. And then you reach Wily Castle, and while you get fantastic music there, the actual design of the castle is pretty rough, with some unfair moments and a lot of things that are just better if you already know they're coming. With Mega Man 3, I found the Robot Master stages to be a bit of a slog, especially because I remembered so few of what Robot Masters were weak to which others. It became a lot more nebulous this time around about what the weaknesses are. I eventually figured them out, but it took a lot of trial and error, and I had to replay stages quite a bit, lengthening the playtime. Now, that's just the normal Mega Man experience. I'm not going to dock it too much for that, but it really felt like the enemies were just out for blood this time around. It lacked the flow that Mega Man 2 had with many of its Robot Master levels, and I found myself just not enjoying them in the same way. Now, that's not to say these are bad stages, they just don't have that flow. There's too many enemies attacking all at once, and so it's easy to just get bogged down and die quite a bit. However, once you get to Wily Castle, it becomes a breeze. These are really fun stages, they're not too challenging, they're very generous with the E-Tanks, and it just feels like a solid victory lap until you reach the end. And that's why it's left me with such a conundrum. Which one is the better game? And while ultimately Mega Man 3 does have a major weakness in the form of the Doc robots, I do think it is the superior game. Now, let me explain, especially with the Doc robots, because the Doc robots are an idea that should be a knockout. Something that should have returned with each game, maybe even instead of a rematch against all the current bosses. Because the idea of refighting the Robot Masters from the previous game with the new set of weapons and figuring out their weaknesses this time around is fantastic. What's not fantastic is putting their bodies into the same robot design, making them bigger with a harder to dodge hitbox, and making it an absolute slog to get through as you have to re-challenge levels that are remixed, to be fair, and not having a checkpoint to really help you figure out what their weaknesses are. I burned through a lot of E-Tanks in order to figure these out or just survive because I didn't want to restart the level again and again trying to figure out and getting the right combination. So it's a challenge. It is absolutely a challenge. It is the weakest part of the game by far. But again, once you get to the Wily Castle, it's fantastic. It's a great time. And there's so many other elements that I feel it adds more to the overall canon of Mega Man than 2 ever does. 2 got the gameplay pushed in the right direction. 3 solidified it. The controls are responsive as you could ever hope. It included the new slide maneuver, which is fantastic for dodging bosses or changing up the level design so you're just figuring out how to move. It introduces Rush over the items, which adds so much more personality, and of course Rush Jet is almost broken with how easily you can get around with it, and even uses the trick of jumping constantly so you can conserve energy, and of course the introduction of Proto Man. And all of these elements have become mainstays of the Mega Man franchise. Mega Man 3 is where it fully solidified. Obviously there are still a few things missing that will be introduced in later games, and even the Doc Robots kind of does that to a degree, where they took the criticisms of this portion and adapted it for the later games to make it less of a slog, more interesting, and just general gameplay wise, it's also smoother. The fact that you can hold so many E-tanks, the fact that you don't lose them with a game over. On paper, this game is easier than the first, but they just cranked up the amount of enemies in the Robot Master levels to kind of drag down the experience, and of course the Doc Robots. And so that's why it's so fascinating to me about the debate. I don't blame anyone for believing Mega Man 2 is better than Mega Man 3. You can point to the music, you can point to the Robot Master weapons, it all makes sense. And while I think Mega Man 3 still has a fantastic soundtrack, I will admit that the Robot Master weapons aren't the best. Top Man has its uses, but it's always a big risk. Hard Man's attack is far too slow. Needle Man's is either the most devastating weapon ever or completely useless, and the list kind of continues from there. But once you get the hang of it, once you sort of understand what you're working with, it's not too bad. And that's, again, the tricky thing. It's a conflicted feeling going from 2 to 3 and really trying to decipher which I enjoyed more. But as I said, I do believe it's 3. I think it adds just enough to make it a lot of fun, and there are even introductions that made it far more simple. Rather than having to fight all the Robot Masters and then immediately go to Wily, you fight all the Robot Masters, it ends the stage, and then you have the Wily fight so you can just focus on just that fight. It is far more kind to the player and prevents the endless repetition that I had to go through in my journey to beat Mega Man 2. So yeah, I get it. I get why people like Mega Man 2, but I definitely prefer Mega Man 3. And the more I think about it, the more I find myself falling onto that side. Because before it was like, oh God, I have no idea which one I like more. What am I going to say about this? I'm not actually sure. But the more I thought about it, the more I looked at it, it's definitely an iterative sequel, but it's a refinement, a further refinement, and a game that introduced so much to this franchise that people still associate with to this day. And I gotta say, just as a special thought, the Wily Castle 3 and 4 music is one of the most underrated tracks out there. It is straight fire, and I forgot about it, and I will be singing its praises for a while now because you just don't hear anybody talk about it, and it is so freaking good. So yeah, not as much to say about this one because we're working with iterations. There's not a whole lot different. It's more about the debate between 2 and 3 for me. But 3 does offer plenty of its own, and I think comes out stronger for it, even if there are some missteps along the way. But yeah, that's just my thoughts. What do you think of Mega Man 3? Of course, let me know in the comments below. And if you enjoyed this video, be sure to subscribe to Good Vibes Gaming for more on Mega Man. And you can even support us further over on Patreon at patreon.com/gvgaming. Thank you so much for watching, and until next time, bye!